Everybody, Jimmy Smith doing my picks for fightpicks.com for UFC 239. John Jones versus Thiago Santos. Also, I'll be doing the post-fight show for Sirius XM. If you have a Sirius XM radio, I'll be doing that. So, some work this week for this show. It's going to be interesting. Now, there are a lot of picks that I'm confident about because a lot of veteran names, a lot of people we have a lot of background on, we've seen them fight a lot of times, we have a lot of information to work with. But the methods are a little interesting. So I'm going to go into detail about those because I think the method of how someone's going to win and when they're going to win, that's really the tricky part. Picking winners isn't that tough. Figuring out when they're going to get the win and how they're going to do it in MMA, where there are so many variables, that's really the hard part. So, Michael Chiesa versus Diego Sanchez. Chiesa all the way. That would be my pick. He's really peaking right now. He looked good at 170 pounds. I like the fact that the cut, not having the cut, has really had a great effect on him. Great submission game. Now, one of the themes we're going to see throughout this card is someone's strengths versus their opponent's weaknesses, and they don't necessarily match up well. And Chiesa versus Diego Sanchez is one of those. Michael Chiesa, his strength is his submission game. He has never knocked an opponent out in mixed martial arts on the pro level. Diego Sanchez has never been submitted in mixed martial arts at the pro level. So the interesting thing is, Michael Chiesa's strengths don't play to the weaknesses of Diego Sanchez. Not getting tapped out is a strength of Diego Sanchez. This is a guy who didn't get tapped out by BJ Penn, got knocked out. The cut, obviously, a TKO victory for BJ Penn there, but this guy has been with some great submission artists, had never been submitted. But Michael Chiesa, a great submission guy, obviously, that's how he gets it done most of the time. When he finishes is by submission, did to Carlos Condit. Not a knockout guy. That's been Diego Sanchez's vulnerability, especially recently. He's been knocked out a couple times. So, although his chin, he does love to stand and trade. So Michael Chiesa's strength is his submission game. Does he get the submission against Diego Sanchez? That's the hard part. He said he's going to be the first person to lie all the time. But I do believe he's going to put a lot of effort into the submission here. So I'm going out on a limb here. I don't think picking Michael Chiesa is going out on a limb, but I say he does get it done by submission. I think it's in the third round. So Michael Chiesa, very confident about that. But going out on a limb a little bit with the method. Submission, third round is where I'm going with Michael Chiesa versus Diego Sanchez. Luke Rockhold versus Jan Blachowicz. And this is another one. Blachowicz, his strength is not in his striking game. It's in his submission game. When he gets it done on the ground. Luke Rockhold, his weakness is generally the risks he takes with his chin. So this is a guy who, Michael Bisping, although a great striker, not a one-shot knockout guy, knocked out Luke Rockhold. Why? Luke Rockhold has a habit of dropping his hands and almost daring you to knock him out. And it's bit him in the ass in a couple of fights. So the interesting thing here is Jan Blachowicz, who's a tough fighter, hasn't fought many great names, hasn't been successful against great names, but he's big. He's consistent generally with his takedown, with his submission game, his ground and pound, but hasn't had a big fight against a big name, but his strength's on the ground. Luke Rockhold has fought a ton of great names, but they've been at 185 pounds, and his tendency to take just absurd, to me, defensive risks has been his undoing many times. Against David Branch, against a guy who's good, not great, rocked him and almost finished him early because he was once again mugging and taking chances with his chin. But he's facing a guy who's not a hard puncher at 205 pounds. And we'll get into this a little bit later about the strength of most strikers at 205. So style-wise, I think this is a good one for Luke Rockhold. This is a guy who will stand and bank when he has to, but will be vulnerable to Luke Rockhold's attack, especially his kicks, his versatility on the feet. I do like his aggression standing up. I do like his knockout ability. Great on the ground in his own right. I don't see Jan Blachowicz finishing him on the ground. But Luke Rockhold's striking, I think, is going to be too much for Blachowicz. So, once again, it's a strength versus strength thing where Blachowicz's strength is on the ground, but that's where Luke Rockhold is strong. Also, Blachowicz, not a hard puncher, and that's been Luke Rockhold's weaknesses. So just weaknesses in recent fights. So I think the matchup here favors Luke Rockhold. I'm going on a little bit on a limb here. We'll see how Jan Blachowicz, how he does against Blachowicz, but I don't see Luke Rockhold being a factor against the elite at 205 pounds. But his first step, I expect him to do well. Luke Rockhold, KO, TKO, second round. So I think Luke Rockhold has trouble down the stretch with the better, bigger, harder punchers at 205. But right now, against Jan Blachowicz, who's not a great puncher, I think Luke gets through this one. KO, TKO, second round. Ben Askren, once again, stylistically, I thought Robbie Lawler would be a tougher matchup for Ben Askren stylistically than a lot of the strikers at 170 pounds. Why? He had taken on excellent wrestlers throughout his career, had given them a lot of trouble, and he hits like a freight train. So when he does have opportunities to hit you, he's going to hit you hard and really test Ben Askren's chin. I thought the loss, if you saw my earlier video about it, I thought the stoppage was bad. A factor in this fight necessarily. But Jorge Masvidal presents problems that I think Ben Askren deals with better than he dealt with Robbie Lawler, for example. And I'll tell you why. Jorge Masvidal is a great combination puncher. He's very, very accurate, good footwork, great combinations. He's not a huge puncher in terms of a one-shot knockout, generally speaking. His shots are accurate. His shots have great timing. He hits you with more than one. He stuns you and then unloads and finishes you. The problem with Ben Askren is he will dive for a takedown from across the octagon, just like he did against Robbie Lawler. No setup, no nothing, dive for your legs. He doesn't give you the opportunity to usually get more than one shot, which means it's going to take a hard punch who can really stun Ben with one to stop him if you don't have Division I wrestling experience, which Jorge Masvidal does not. Not that he doesn't have great wrestling training, wrestling partners and all those things. He wasn't a Division I wrestler. He just didn't have that experience. He has been against strikers. So he doesn't have a long list of fighters who fight like Ben Askren that he's beaten. Not that almost no one wrestles like Ben Askren. Even in Division I and the Olympics, nobody wrestles like Ben Askren. It's style funky Ben Askren. But if you've taken a lot of D1 guys, at least you have experience stopping the takedown. Jorge Masvidal has not. He hasn't had a lot of success against great grapplers. Of course, Damian Maia beat him by decision, so he's had some vulnerability to the takedown, the top pressure of a Damian Maia. I think Ben Askren does the same thing. One of the smartest bets, I think, in MMA, or safest, is Ben Askren by decision. And that's how I think he gets it done. Ben Askren by decision. Jorge Masvidal has to stun Ben Askren and follow up with some knockout punches before Ben can get the takedown. That's if Jorge Masvidal wins, that's how he wins. I think that's asking a lot from somebody who doesn't have a great wrestling background. The person who beats Ben Askren has had some Division I experience. The one time Ben Askren has looked vulnerable in the fights I've seen, and I remember I called a bunch of his fights, was Jay Heron, who was not a great Division I wrestler, but had at least wrestled Division I at Hofstra, and Ben had a lot of trouble with him. I thought he lost that fight. And even if you thought Ben won, he didn't look good. So I think it's going to take a Division I wrestler, or somebody with some, I know Kamaru Usman didn't wrestle Division I, but on that level, to at least stop Ben's takedown and make him fight a stand-up fight, which he won't be comfortable with. Jorge Masvidal, to me, just doesn't fit that mold. So I say Ben Askren by decision. Amanda Nunes versus Holly Holm. I think Holly Holm is, I don't want to say thrown into this fight, but Amanda Nunes needs to fight somebody. Holly Holm's a big name. She will probably make an entertaining fight. She does have stand-up skills, and so she's in here. I don't think she's necessarily earned it from her performances in her last few fights. Amanda Nunes is on a tear. Fantastic win against Cyborg. Of course, we know about Ronda Rousey, Shevchenko. Close fight, but she won that one. I think Amanda Nunes just brings too much firepower for Holly Holm. Now, remember, Holly Holm stood and traded a lot with Cyborg and lost that fight, to me, decisively. But wasn't knocked out, wasn't TKO'd. But that was a couple fights ago, and Amanda Nunes so far is just a different animal than everyone else, I think, in women's MMA. And she said recently that she feels she should be up with the pound for pound elite in all of MMA. Hard to argue with her, considering her record and her performances in her last few fights. I think she's too much for Holly Holm. Amanda Nunes by KO, TKO, fourth round. That's what I'm saying. My only hem and haw here is Holly Holm's gone through some very, very tough fights, and usually she sees the final bell. I don't think she does with this one. So my only hem and haw, is it by decision or is it by late stoppage? I'm going with late stoppage. Amanda Nunes, KO, TKO, fourth round. Jon Jones, Thiago Santos. Jon Jones right now, of course, the man at 205 pounds, and you could argue pound for pound, for sure, one of the elite of all time. Against Thiago Santos, a guy coming up from 185 pounds, where he spent most of his career. So the people who think Thiago Santos can or will win have basically the puncher's chance argument. He is explosive. He is a hard puncher. He is athletic. He does close range very, very well, meaning a lot of leaping shots. You think you're out of range, you're not. He just, boom, comes in and hits you. What I don't see when I look at this fight is that X factor. The only two fighters that I thought had a good chance against Jon Jones, I didn't necessarily pick them, but I thought they had a good chance, were DC and Gustafsson. The reason was, for Gustafsson, Jon Jones was looking across the octagon at a guy who had a lot of his physical advantages, was just as tall, just as rangy, just as fast. So Jon Jones, who relies on his range and relies on having a build other fighters just don't have at 205 pounds, was finally facing a guy who kind of had that build. And so a lot of his physical advantages went away, and he had to rely on other things. Now, he did, and he won that fight twice. But that's why I thought Gustafsson had a good shot. That was my X factor. With DC was a standout wrestler who had better credentials than Jon Jones when it came to the wrestling. I thought his wrestling might give Jon Jones some trouble. I was at the first fight. I didn't call it, but I was there. And Jon Jones proved to be the better fighter, able to stop the takedown, make it a striking war, and that's where he's at his best. But the X factor was DC's wrestling. So the only two times I thought a fighter had a good chance against Jon Jones, there was that thing where I went, well, they have this that Jon Jones doesn't have. Or in the case of Gustafsson, he has this thing that Jon Jones has and is used to be the only one who has it. Thiago Santos, to me, doesn't have that thing. Yes, he's explosive, but he's dealt with explosive guys before, particularly Gustafsson. He's a hard puncher. Jon Jones has dealt with hard punchers before. At 205 in heavyweight, even 185, you can even say 185 and above, knockout punchers are the rule, not the exception. The 205-pounder who can't hit you on the chin and knock you out is rare. Most of them are hard punchers. Most of them are athletic. So Jon Jones isn't seeing in Thiago Santos anything he hasn't seen before. Now, can he still catch him? Of course he can. Jon Jones at 31 years old, could he be past that super Jon Jones physical prime? Maybe. I think in his last few fights, he's had to fight smarter. He's getting a little bit older, and his fight IQ has gotten him through his last few fights. They've been dominant performances, but he's been thinking his way through these fights. In his earlier fights, when he was fighting veterans, he was the explosive guy. He was the athletic guy. He was the young buck who could do all these things these veterans couldn't. Now that he's facing this next generation, Santos and Smith, he's the thinker. He's the veteran. They're the physical explosive guys. So I think he's taking on another physical explosive guy, and I think his IQ is going to be a little too much. Softens him up, and takes him out. Anthony Smith, in the last fight, showed real guts and heart staying in that fight and not taking the DQ no contest he could have taken. So Santos, I don't know if he has that in him. We shall see. But I think Jon Jones, I think he gets it done by submission. I think he takes him down, he plays it safe, and he wins by submission in round 3. So my pick for Jon Jones, Thiago Santos in the main event is Jon Jones by submission in the 3rd round. So, a little recap. Michael Chiesa versus Diego Sanchez. Very confident in my Michael Chiesa pick. Going out a little bit on a limb with the method. Submission 3rd round, submitting Diego Sanchez for the first time in his career. Luke Rockhold, Jan Blachowicz. I think Luke Rockhold a little bit too much in the striking department. KO, TKO in the 2nd round. Ben Askren versus Jorge Masvidal. Ben Askren by decision. Think he out-wrestles Jorge Masvidal. Amanda Nunes over Holly Holmes. I got to go with the champ, Amanda Nunes, by TKO, KO, 4th round. Jon Jones, Thiago Santos. Got to go with Jon Jones by submission round number 3. Go to fightpicks.com. Jimmy Smith, all one word. Sign up for free and see how you do. See you after the fight and go over what I got right and what I got wrong.